You're listening to The Mitch Albom Show on News Talk 760 WJR. Sitting in for Mitch, here's Guy Gordon.
Nowhere is the generation gap perhaps more pronounced than now in the difference between millennials and boomers. And Jerry Acuff is at the other end of our line, who has explored this, especially as it relates to sales and leadership. Jerry, good afternoon.
Hey, Guy, how are you?
We're good. You know, I think sometimes unfairly that millennials get this rap of not having a very good work ethic. And I don't know if it's they work less. I just think they work differently. What have you found?
Well, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I think they absolutely work differently. I mean, you know, to baby boomers, which I'm one of those, you know, work was the key. Hard work was the key to our success. To this group, hard work is important. They believe in it, but they believe in doing it differently. I mean, and they grew up with technology, which, you know, has enabled them to do everything sort of in a different, in as many ways, a more efficient and effective way. So, you know, my experience is that, I mean, are there lazy millennials? Yeah, but there's lazy baby boomers too. But as a generation, you know, what I have found is that they just work differently. And the reality is, it's like any other leadership opportunity, the people that lead them, you know, need to see them as customers and try and see the world the way they do, not the way we would like to see it.
The one thing that I have recognized in them, though, and this is, I work with a lot of young people, is that they, I never recall in the earliest days of my career worrying about work-life balance. I knew that I was going to have to pay my dues, and it was going to be a lot of 18-hour days, and it wasn't, you know, we're in the kind of business where you don't punch a clock. But I hear millennials, at least, talking a lot about that right out of college. Well, I want to make sure I have the right work-life balance. I'm not sure they understand what those early days are supposed to be about.
But I think it's a larger issue than that. I mean, I think the Simon Sinek on YouTube has a really good thing on millennials, and one of the things he says, which I think is really poignant, he says, you know, the reality is they grew up differently than we did. I mean, we didn't have the kind of tools and technology that made instant gratification the norm. You know, we didn't grow up in, by and large, you know, fast food generation. You still waited 5 or 6 minutes to get your burger. Nowadays, everything is fast and everything is instant gratification. And so what these kids are not learning is, you know, the things that take time. You know, one of the things that Simon Sinek said in his thing, which I loved, he said, you know, the two things that there are no apps for, one is job satisfaction, and the other one is meaningful relationships. You know, I wrote a book called The Relationship Edge in Business. I've actually written, you know, 3 different versions of it. But they don't understand, especially at an early age, especially right after college, especially in college, the criticality of building real relationships. So many of the relationships that they have, even though they have an average of 250, you know, friends on Facebook, a lot of those relationships are they're more superficial than they are real. And so what they've not done is had to learn the skill of being patient and persistent in finding job satisfaction, finding meaningful relationships, understanding that you don't, you know, turn the world on fire, you know, within 8 months after you graduate from college and start worrying about your work-life balance. You know, what you should be worrying about is, am I getting the lessons of experience that'll ultimately lead me to the kind of success that I want, depending on how I define success.
Have you noticed now that these new millennial workplaces, I'm saying millennial workplaces, just corporations now are making these one-stop work environments where it's like a play center. You got gyms in them. You have rec rooms with games going. You got the whole thing, and the experience now is your home is basically now at the workplace. Like when we baby boomers came out, you know, it was work. Then you went home and did everything.
Yeah, you might pass a playground on the way to work or
right.
on the way home, but you weren't going to one.
Right.
I think candidly that, you know, for some companies that's probably necessary. Maybe that's really necessary in you know, Silicon Valley, but in many cases it's overreacting. What these young people want, my experience, and I deal with a lot of them, is they want meaningful work. Number one. They want to know that they're doing something that really matters, and they don't mind doing it for less money, as long as they believe it matters. The second thing they want is they want to work for a coach. They want somebody who will actually help them figure out how they navigate the organization to make themselves successful. Now, they have a very short attention span. They're likely to only stay, 2 or 3 years in many cases. But I've also found that the biggest thing that if I'm a leader, the biggest thing I want to try and understand when I interview millennials is what kind of parenting did they get? Because if they had helicopter parents, my guess is they're going to approach life like a helicopter child. If they had parents who had, solid blue-collar work values, who taught the importance of family and relationships and friends and helping others and a servant's mindset, my experience is when you hire those people, there's no difference between them and the hardest-working baby boomer that you ever met. They still want more work-life balance.
Can you ask them that without being sued these days?
Pardon?
Can you ask a prospective employee that these days without being sued?
If you ask it the right way, you can. Sure.
Well,
tell me. All you have to do is say, tell me a little bit about your, your childhood. That's all you have to ask. My guess is you can do that. I always ask them to tell me about your first job. And what I find is that if their first job was when they were 24, I'm not really that interested in them. I want somebody whose first job was at 13, 14, 15, right. And maybe it was cutting the grass. Or, I have a 17-year-old son, and, he's working at the drive-in, but he volunteered at the drive-in 3 years before he could actually technically go to work. So, I want to see people who actually have a strong work ethic already when I get them, regardless of what generation I'm interested in talking to somebody.
So, Jerry, what do you do, especially in the sales environment, where you've got maybe a boomer salesman calling on a millennial client? They're going to try to develop a relationship with somebody that really doesn't know what kind of relationship they want or what a relationship should be. And if you flip the roles, it's just as bad. The boomer has expectations as a client to make a connection with his salesperson who isn't reaching out. How do you build that bridge?
Well, it's a great question. One of my hobbies is I mentor 4 Division I college basketball coaches, and one of the things that I advise these folks to do is to get a mentor who's a millennial. And one of the things that I advise, millennials. This morning I had breakfast with a 21-year-old college student who's a football player, and I said, look, here's a person that I want you to learn. He's a guy named Andre Thornton, who's one of the brightest young leadership experts in America. And I said, Andre's 40 years old, and he's traveled the road that you're going to travel, and you ought to connect with him. So I think, to me, it's a lot like, I wrote a book called Stop Acting Like a Seller, Start Thinking Like a Buyer. And I think if you're a boomer, calling a millennial probably helps for you to truly understand how millennials think. The easiest way to do that is to build a relationship with one. And the same thing is true if you're a millennial calling a boomer. I always say to my coaches, you need 2 mentors. You need a millennial, and you need an old, wise person who can tell you the difference between the stuff that's going to go away and the stuff that ain't going to go away. And so the easiest way to deal with all of that is to try and see the world from the customer's eyes. And to do that, it takes some work. It takes some investigation. Now, one of the things I know, I go to a college twice a year, and I teach a course on my book, The Relationship Edge in Business. And when I went there the last time, I said to myself, I'm going to try and teach one of these young kids a lesson. So I found somebody who I knew would be in the class, and while I was flying on the airplane, I started looking on the Internet to see what I could find out about her. Now, I learned this from a millennial. So my millennial, who's a mentor, said, you need to try and find out as much as you can about people before you meet them, and here's some of the things you can do. Well, before I landed in Chicago, and I flew from Philadelphia, I knew this young woman's email address. I knew her cell phone number. I knew her mother's name. I knew her sister's name, her sister's boyfriend's name. I knew where she went to high school. I knew where she lived. I knew that she was the 17th best high jumper in her high school history. She was voted best dressed. I knew the 2 awards that she'd won in college. I knew 12 things about her. And so when I saw her, I said, her name was Sydney. I said, Sydney, can I ask you a question? I said, can I embarrass you a little bit today in class? So I don't really embarrass you, but just out of curiosity, what do you know about me? Because the truth is, as a millennial, if I'm going to meet somebody that I think is someone I'd want a relationship with, I want to try and know something about them. You know, I mean, for example, and this is a small thing, but, you know, Guy, your daughter went to Sweetbriar. I'm 40 miles from Sweetbriar. Not that that's a big deal, but my point is she didn't know anything about me. And I said, all I'm trying to tell you is that you're getting ready to go interview. And this is one of the big things that millennials are missing. Millennials are not as steeped in how do you intentionally and in a disciplined way build a relationship. And I said, and the way you do that is you actually learn something about people so that when you're having a conversation with them, you can slip into the conversation something which demonstrates that you actually cared enough to go find out something about them. Now, you know, you don't want to give them an encyclopedic treatise on who they are, but you want to demonstrate that you're different from the other people that they're interviewing. And so I think the biggest thing is to get people to understand that if I'm trying to sell anybody, you know, and when we teach people this for a living, I want to try and understand how does the other person think. Because if I can't change the way you think, then I'm not going to change the way you act. And for me to be able to change the way you think, I got to understand it.
Well, the book is The Relationship Edge in Business, and you've inspired me to take a look at it. Jerry Acuff, thanks for your insights on this generation gap that needs to be bridged.
Well, thank you for having me. It's terrific to be with you.
Okay.
Take care. He must have checked me out on Facebook. Either that, he can read my mind.